Let's talk about the towering figure of Northrop Frye, the Canadian literary critic and theorist who reshaped how we think about literature in the 20th century. While deconstruction was gaining attention, some dismissed Frye as an old-fashioned structuralist. His frameworks continue to endure because he treated literature not as a side subject but as central to human civilization. Margaret Atwood once remarked, and note this because it was asked in exam, that Frye did not lock literature into an ivory tower. Instead, he emphasized its centrality to the development of a civilized humane society. Even Harold Bloom, no stranger to strong opinions, admitted that Frye's Anatomy of Criticism secured his place as the foremost living student of Western literature. Pause here and reflect, what was Frye actually trying to do? He believed that literature is built on symbolic and mythic structures that repeat across cultures and times. He argued that metaphor works by identifying the speaker with the object, creating symbolic connections between human experience and the natural world. From this arise allegories, archetypes, and myths that echo through the Bible, Greek and Roman epics, and beyond. To Frye, these patterns are not random, they are the very backbone of literature itself. He often quoted Wallace Stevens' phrase, "the motive for metaphor," to describe this human impulse to link our inner world with outer reality. For Frye, such connections create a unified field of literature where meaning is not fragmented but ordered by recurring archetypes and myths. Can you recall why this matters for exams? Because when you see archetypal criticism in your syllabus, Frye's name is the key anchor. Now let's zoom in on his first major book, Fearful Symmetry, a study of William Blake, published in 1947. This is another point that was asked in exam. Frye reinterpreted Blake's visionary poetry, arguing that it should not be reduced to allegorical puzzles. Instead, Blake created an entire symbolic universe of his own, a coherent system of meaning that must be read as a whole. Frye's analysis showed that historical context and structural unity could work together, offering a fresh way of approaching poetry. So here's the takeaway. While later theories emphasized instability and deconstruction, Frye gave us order and structure. He insisted that literature speaks through its archetypes and myths, and that these symbols connect us across history and culture. Northrop Frye's Anatomy of Criticism, 4 essays, published in 1957. Frye described this book as an interconnected group of suggestions meant to build nothing less than a comprehensive theory of criticism. Unlike critics who borrowed their principles from history, philosophy, or psychology, Frye wanted to ground criticism in the internal principles of literature itself. Pause here and note this down. The book is structured with a polemical introduction, a tentative conclusion, and 4 powerful essays in between. These are historical criticism, theory of modes, ethical criticism, theory of symbols, archetypal criticism, a theory of myths, and rhetorical criticism, theory of genres. Together, they offer critics a systematic method for analyzing literature through recurring narrative patterns, symbolic structures, and genre conventions. Frye's most famous contribution is his cyclical schema that links the 4 seasons of the year to literary modes, myths, and even stages of life. This is a classic UGC Net favorite, so be careful. In Frye's model, spring corresponds to comedy and the myth of birth, asked in exam. Summer corresponds to romance, youth, and the myth of triumph and harmony, asked in exam. Autumn corresponds to tragedy, maturity, and the myth of decline and separation, asked in exam. And winter corresponds to irony, death, and the myth of chaos and darkness, asked in exam. Think about how simple yet powerful this is. Every story we tell, Frye suggests, echoes the rhythm of the natural world. Comedy feels like springtime renewal, tragedy feels like autumn decline, and irony feels like the cold darkness of winter. Can you recall where romance fits? Exactly, it belongs to summer, the season of youthful triumph. Frye's work, along with his earlier Fearful Symmetry, recast criticism as a coherent and systematic discipline. For him, Literature was not a collection of isolated texts, but a unified symbolic order shaped by archetypes and myths. Even though later theories like deconstruction and post-structuralism challenged his framework, Frye's vision remains unforgettable for its clarity and scope. So remember this, Anatomy of Criticism isn't just a book. It's a map of literature itself, showing us how myths, symbols and genres weave together into the grand cycles of human imagination. Let's decode the work of Jonathan Culler, one of the most important American literary critics of our time. Born in 1944, Culler has been a long-time professor of English and comparative literature at Cornell University, and he has shaped how the English-speaking world engages with structuralism and literary theory. Pause here and note this down. His book Structuralist Poetics was asked in exam. Published in the 1970s, it was one of the very first systematic introductions to French structuralism written in English. This book established him as a leading interpreter of continental theory. Culler warned us not to simply copy the linguistic model of structuralism and apply it directly to literature. Instead, he suggested something more flexible, what he called the grammar of literature. By this, he meant the underlying conventions and rules that make a text meaningful. Just as grammar structures language, these literary conventions structure interpretation. For Culler, no action, no text, no cultural product has meaning on its own. It only makes sense when placed inside an existing system of codes, traditions, and cultural conventions. Now, here's something you'll love. Culler later expanded these insights into the broader field of literary theory. His small but widely read book Literary Theory, a very short introduction, published in 2007, became a starting point for countless students worldwide. In it, he explains that theory is not just about literature, it's an interdisciplinary field. It pulls in ideas from linguistics, anthropology, Marxism, semiotics, psychoanalysis, and of course, literary criticism. But the most important lesson he gives us is this. Theory doesn't just extract meaning from text, it questions the very process of interpretation itself. Can you recall what makes reading possible in his framework? Exactly the idea of the competent reader. A reader who can make sense of literature only because they share knowledge of conventions like genre, style, or narrative expectations. But Culler also reminds us that not all readers are the same. Readers are shaped by their history, their culture, their time. He even divides them into two categories: the critic, who interprets texts while constructing a field of meaning, and future readers who benefit from the critic's work and reinterpret those texts anew. Let me tell you about the story of Jacques Ehrmann, a French literary theorist whose career was short but highly influential. Born in 1931, Ehrmann became a faculty member at Yale University in 1961 and remained there until his untimely death in 1972. In just over a decade, he managed to leave a clear mark on the rise of structuralist criticism in the American academy. Pause here and note this down. Ehrmann wasn't just a teacher. He was a bridge between French theory and the English-speaking world. He became deeply involved in the structuralist and post-structuralist debates that were reshaping literary studies in the 1960s and 70s. At Yale, he worked closely with scholars who would later become famous names in theory, helping to establish the university as a hub for intellectual innovation. Ehrmann's most remembered contribution was as editor of the Structuralism issue of Yale French Studies. This special edition became a milestone in bringing structuralist ideas from Europe to America. Through this, he introduced students and scholars to the methods of Saussure, Lévi-Strauss, Barthes, and others, laying the foundation for what later became known as the Yale School of Criticism. Can you recall why this matters for us? Because without figures like Ehrmann, structuralist thought might have remained confined to France. Instead, it traveled, evolved, and sparked debates in the United States that gave us some of the most important theoretical discussions of the 20th century. And that's the wrap for Chapter 12 on Structuralism. You now know how Saussure, Lévi-Strauss, and Barthes shaped this movement and why it's key for UGC NE. All resources, videos, PDFs, PYQs, last-minute notes and diary notes are posted in the app. Download it now from the link in the description and keep your preparation one step ahead.